Hello everyone and welcome to this video presentation. In this presentation we will see how we can create a second domain controller for an existing domain. So previously we had installed SRVDC1 and we promoted to a domain controller, which is the domain adatum.com. Now we are adding another server which is SRV-DC3. I already configured the network for this server to point to the right place. So it has an IP address in the same subnet, and it points to the DNS server, which is the IP address of my first domain controller, because my first domain controller is a DNS server also. And enable for me to be able to connect to a domain controller or to a domain, I have to point to a DNS server that is one of the domain controllers. So this is already set here. I set already the computer name. I added the role Active Directory Domain Services. Now I will promote this server to be a domain controller. Right now it is a member of a work group. So I will click on the notification area here and click on promote this server to a domain controller. Now on this window here, we saw how we can, the first time when we added the SRVDC1, we used the option add a new forest because it was our first forest, first site, first domain. The second time we added a new child domain and we used the second option, which add a new domain to an existing forest. Okay, so in this case, we added a secondary domain, which was a child domain, which was mtl.adatum.com. This time we're going to add a second domain controller to the same domain. So it will work exactly as the SRVDC1. So now we need to click on select here to select our domain. I need to log in with the administrator account of the domain. So I will type adatum/administrator and the password 01. So now it's searching on the domain to find, searching the forest to find any domain. So it should find this domain adatum.com. Once it finds it, I will select it. So it found two of them. It found the adatum.com and the mtl.adatum.com. So we needed to add this domain controller to be a secondary domain controller to the adatum.com domain, not to the mtl.adatum.com. So I will select the adatum.com. I will click on OK. I will keep using the credentials of the administrator of the adatum domain. I will click on Next. Here, I will enter the password for the directory services restore mode. So we'll be using the same password that we used for our labs. So it will be password 01. I will go next, then next. So now for the replication, it's asking me, do you want this domain controller to replicate from which domain? Sometimes we might have multiple domains and we might maybe prefer one specific domain which is closest to that domain. So we don't want maybe to go over one link or something to access another domain. So we could specify which server to connect. In our case, we only have one domain controller, so we can keep it any domain controller. And we can click on next. This is the default paths for the database, the log file, and the sysvol folders. We'll keep the default. We go next. We go next. It will check for prerequisites. So if all prerequisites passed, we can install. You will always have some warnings here because of backward compatibilities for NT 4.0 or previous versions of Windows Server. So it does not affect us. Since we have all prerequisites checked passed successfully, we can click on install to install. So now it finished. can close, and it should restart the server. So now that the server is started, let's log in. We can see that we are already connected to the domain, so we are logging in as a domain administrator. So if I open on this server here, if I open Active Directory users and computers, and I go expand my datum.com domain and go to domain compute controllers, I can see that I have SRVDC1 and DC3. If I do the same thing on this one also, I should see the same thing exactly. So it is a replication of what is on SRVDC1. So whenever I create any user or any group, any computer on any of the two domain controllers, it will be replicated on the other domain controller at the same time. So that was about creating a second domain controller for an existing domain. That ends this presentation.